So everybody is. I guess the news died down a little bit yesterday. Monday, Evergrande was all anybody could talk about. Yesterday, it kind of died down, and I don't see too much about it today. There's still little rumblings about it, but you know, essentially, what's going on here with China, the Communist Party is getting a little bit fed up with the capitalism, the level of capitalism going on in China. And they see it as a threat to their power, obviously, which it is. Um, it started with Jack Ma, uh, and there was a good video on YouTube about what happened with Jack Ma. Let me see if it's. Let me look in my history here. History. Where is history? Go here. So there was a Wall Street Journal piece on Jack Ma. It was really deferential to the Communist Party, obviously, because most mainstream American media is a bit deferential. Yeah, this one right here. This it gives you a little brief synopsis on Jack Ma. So what happened with him is one thing that pissed the Communist Party off is first of all, the main thing that pisses them off and that that threatens them is the amount of power he has because he's one of the richest men in the world and one of the most rich and one of the most powerful businessmen in China. And the Chinese Communist Party wants to be on top of everything. It's a totalitarian regime, and they want to remain totalitarian. Now, if we go back to the history of China, we have to keep in mind the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion occurred during, and this is one of many rebellions. China has had a history of rebellions, of massive rebellions. It's a massive country that has been that in very diverse country, several major languages spoken in China, and people don't and Americans, of course, being generally ignorant to the rest of the world, don't tend to think about these things. But, the Taiping Rebellion is something that's still very much in the consciousness of the Chinese and especially the rulers of the Chinese. And it was caused by this guy right here who thought he was the son or brother of Jesus Christ or something. But what ended up happening is there was already a lot of civil strife in China at the time because the Qing dynasty was in power. The British were over here doing the Opium Wars around the same time, and here comes Hong Jingquan, and he thinks he's the brother of Jesus. And you have death and destruction on a massive scale. He was also an early Marxist, by the way, if you want to be honest. He which would make sense because Jesus' teachings and Jesus's sort of teachings were very Marxian themselves. So you could see a lot of Marxism in Hong Jingquan's sort of ideology. But you're talking about one of the bloodiest conflicts, not just of the 19th century, but of in the entirety of history. And this was a civil war. And China has had many, many, many civil wars in its history. And this is why, even today, the rulers of China are very much concerned with keeping the population happy. So what they've found over the past 20, 30 years is that when people have money and when people are comfortable, it keeps them happy. It keeps them from rebelling. And China's had a very, very prosperous, peaceful 20 to 30 years because of the introduction and the promotion of a sort of limited capitalistic sort of limited capitalism. Really, it's not capitalism, it's state capitalism. The Chinese government is more properly called a fascist than a communist regime. But there is no actual private property, so there is no capitalism in China because there is no private property rights. But it's a form of state regulated state capitalism, if you want to call it that. But it's not actual capitalism because actual capitalism requires private property rights, which means government there has to be legal protections from even the government from taking your private property. But this sort of state capitalism, this state regular, which the United States really is also a state capitalist country. China would be closer to a fascist country. The United States has some limited private property rights and legal protections for private property of individuals. So there is some capitalism in the United States. It's just getting exceedingly rare. But in China, there is no actual capitalism. So moving on. So what the Chinese government has found is that limited capitalistic promotion of limited sorts of state capitalism, getting money and consumer goods in the hands of the Chinese people, basically giving them bread and circuses, has kept the Chinese people from rebelling in a way. The last major rebellion was the Tiananmen Square rebellion. Hong Kong is rebelling a little bit now. If the bread and circuses weren't keeping the Chinese under control, the Hong Kong rebellions would have spread all over China. The Chinese people are not complacent people. And even though they're tolerating the Communist Party and the Communist government, make no mistake, if the Chinese people get unhappy enough, they will rise up. They don't give a shit. And the Chinese government knows it. So they've been allowing this capitalism to go through this form of state capitalism, this bread and circuses to go on and go on for years and years and years. But now recently, first we had Jack Ma kind of flexing his muscles, and now we have Evergrande. People don't realize a year ago, the Chinese government, let me find this article. So here's a good little timeline. It's okay. Reuters, look, there's really no good journalist. There's really hardly any good media organizations anymore. One that I can tolerate is Reuters. They're still tolerable. They are definitely biased towards the left, like most of them, but they're also in the pockets of government, like most of them, but they're at least tolerable. So here's a decent timeline, and of note, August 2020, regulators come in and they introduce caps. This is a pilot program. They introduce caps for three different debt ratios. So they come into Evergrande, they say, and they say, oh, this is a pilot program, but we think you have too much debt. So Chinese regulators are coming in. Now, mind you, this is before they went after Jack Ma at the beginning of this year. Okay, so this has been building for some time. The Chinese Communist Party, even though they like the benefits of the bread and circuses, the consumer goods, keeping the Chinese people relatively complacent, at the same time they see the threat of this capitalism, the threat to their power. So they're starting to step in. And really, it was stuff like this that caused that really started the chain reaction. Okay, that brought Evergrande down. So I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I'm not going to sit here and try and predict it, but I'm thinking that the media is pushing for the Chinese government to bail out the company because the media loves bailouts because they're funded by companies that have that have benefited from bailouts. A lot of these companies probably there's if you follow the money, I'm sure there's connections to Evergrande. Evergrande's a big company, maybe to a bank that has sold debt or something to Evergrande, or I mean, has bought the debt of Evergrande most likely. So if you follow the money, I'm sure you can find connections to Evergrande. But also, you know, all of these media organizations are pushing for the merger of corporation and state. They seem to all be pushing for a corporatist, fascist world order. Okay, so they would love for the Chinese government to bail out Evergrande without stipulations, of course. They would love to see the uh, Communist Party become more corporatist. That's my personal opinion. I think if the Chinese government does help Evergrande, there's going to be a lot of stipulations. I think they may have to because with 1 million people that stand to lose money on this, then again, 1 million people in China is not necessarily a lot of people, compared to other countries. So I don't know. Maybe they're going to leave the people high and dry. But I think they're coming to this inflection point where the CCP is coming to this inflection point where they have to choose between allowing capitalism to grow and potentially, certain entities and individuals within China becoming powerful enough to challenge the CCP itself, or do they crack down and potentially on that end increase civil strife at home? Because the Chinese, apparent from what I've seen from everything I've done, I've watched a lot of different travel vlogs, and there was Lao Wai. I learned a lot about modern China from Lao Wai, and the other guy Serptenza, and they love money. Apparently, they love money. And I think if the Chinese government fucks with their money too much, there's going to be a problem. But at the same time, the CCP needs to is feels very threatened, and probably rightfully so, by the growing capitalistic entities in China. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Um, they probably also see things like Evergrande having sold debt to, I'm sure, foreign banks being a problem as well, a problem of foreign influence, and they don't want much of that. I'm not sure how much they've sold to foreign banks, though, so don't quote me on that. But, the media is it's a slow news cycle, so the media has been going after anything they could. Evergrande, what was it today? The thing about the media is they limit themselves very much on what they can cover because there's so many interests that have a stake in the media, and they don't want to offend any of those interests, whether it's a government, whether it's a banker, whether it's some other sponsor to pharmaceutical companies, whatever. We all know about them and the pharmaceutical companies. So the Evergrande thing really got them through Monday. But yeah, that's my take on it. Is that the Chinese government's really at this inflection point as far as how it's going to move forward. It may throw a wrench in its own economic growth rather than risk being supplanted by a corporate sort of by corporate powers. And just people do not realize how susceptible to civil strife China is. We haven't heard about it since, a lot of people don't even think much about Tiananmen Square. The Tiananmen protests were massive. They were all across China. You're talking millions and millions, maybe tens of millions of people across the country were involved in Tiananmen Square protests. Absolutely massive. Almost destroyed the country, which is why they resorted to massacring people. And that, of course, set them back on the world stage. And they don't want that. They want to be able to control their country, but they also want to reap the benefits of being part of a global economy. Like I said, they love money. I'm sure the so called communists of China love the money too. All communists do. You know, in every communist country that's ever existed, the communist leadership, the Communist Party members had the best of everything there was. And the people that weren't connected got jack shit. So I don't know if you can call that a classless society. You know, that's why communism is full of shit from the get go. You know, but China is not really communist. It's more like a fascist country. Okay, in the literal sense of the word. You know, fascism is not about race. Has nothing. You know, in essence, it's about nationalism. That's true, and nationalism can lead to racism. But in the case of, if you look at fascist Italy, for most of fascist Italy's existence, there was no emphasis on race. It was on Italianness, and Italy was a fairly diverse country. Mussolini, for most of his reign, didn't go after Jews. I think towards the end, when he kind of got co-opted by Hitler, then basically not by his design, but Hitler started going after Jews in the part of Italy that wasn't occupied by the United States. But you know, it pissed off Hitler for most of when Italy was independent. Hitler was pissed off that Mussolini didn't pursue Hitler's final solution. And Mussolini was the original fascist, and China is a very diverse country, but I could see this growing nationalism. They seem to be very uh, against foreigners in a lot of ways over there. So they call people from the outside foreigners. But they don't have, it's not by race, it's by people being foreigners. Although there was the thing with the some restaurant or hotel over there not allowing Africans in there, people of African descent in there. Um, but it's not based on race. Fascism is a form of collectivism. It's split off from Marxism. It's split off from socialism. That was Mussolini. He split off from the Socialist Party of um, Italy back in the 1914 or 15 over a disagreement about entering World War One. He wanted to enter World War One, and the Socialist Party and he was high up in the Socialist Party. He was one of the heads of maybe the head of the Socialist Party. So it has its roots in Marxism. It's basically Marxism, but instead of international globalist Marxism and a global world communist order, national fascism calls for nationalistic sort of Marxism or socialism. But they go about how they went about. So they allow they allow basically private ownership on paper in a lot of cases, but the government regulates everything and can nationalize any private property at once under a fascist, regime, because fascism is totalitarianism. You can't have private property rights in a totalitarian regime. It's not even possible. They're antithetical to each other. So fascism allows sort of private regulation of certain aspects of the economy, but ultimately just like with communism, the means of production are seized by the government through regulation and a lot of times outright nationalization. So China is the same way. In China, everything is uh, uh, regulated heavily by the government. The government can at any time, like we've seen with the merger, and right now there was one I just saw where China is where was it? Xi Jinping. There was one article I saw where they're talking about breaking up Alipay. Right, Alipay. So Beijing to break up Ant Alipay. So Ant also had a merger that would have been a huge merger earlier this year, right around the time that Jack Ma disappeared. It would have been great for China's economy, and Beijing said nope. and here they're trying to break up Alipay. So ultimately, Jack Ma, even though he's the founder and majority stakeholder of Ant, he doesn't actually own Ant because there are no private property rights in China. He doesn't actually own the billions of dollars. He probably has. I'm sure he has accounts overseas at this point, but he doesn't actually own any of his companies, any of his stakes. The Chinese government can come in at any time. They can tell him how to run his company, and they can tell, and they can outright seize his company. That's because there are no private property rights. Just like in Nazi Germany, just like in fascist Italy, you had companies that were quote private, but they weren't really private. Okay, in Nazi Germany, Siemens was supposedly, I think, for the entire time, I think Siemens remained privately owned. Well, how is it privately owned if Hitler tells you how to run your company, who you can hire, how much you can pay them, what you can produce, and at what price you can sell those products, and who you can sell them to? Okay, everything about the company the Nazis had ultimate control over, so it was not actually privately controlled. So that's why, much like fascist Italy, more like fascist Italy than Nazi Germany, China would be a fascist country. I would think that Nazi Germany would have had more social welfare programs than China does today, because from my understanding of it, China doesn't have a whole lot of social welfare programs. So much for socialism there. Because generally with socialism, you have a lot of social welfare programs, free education, free healthcare, free this, free that. I think China may have free education, but I don't know if they have free healthcare, and I don't know if they have free social security. I mean, the United States may have more social welfare programs than China. Um, so I think Beijing is at this point where let's see what they do. Let's see if they totally sabotage China's growth. It looks like they already have to some extent. But to them, the most important thing is going to be to keep control. They're saying it's to bring China back to communism, um, back to Mao's communism. That ain't gonna happen. So that's not what it's really about, and they don't want that to happen because Mao's communism, China was a fourth world country with massive poverty, massive famine all the time. They don't want that, and they had a lot of rebellions as well, all the time. But the Chinese government was very proactive in handling those rebellions. I remember when I was in the military, a guy, forget his name, but he lived in China under maybe he was probably young when Mao was around, but maybe not. Maybe he remembered. I know he was in China in the 70s and maybe late 60s. He was much older. But he was from he was an American citizen, of course, and he told me about how the army used to just come through the towns and just pick people up and take them away, and you never saw them again. And they would say something like, "Oh, you're a drug dealer or you're a drug addict." They'd just come to the town. They would make everybody come outside, and they would just point people out and say, "You're a drug addict." He told me that one story, and take people away. So someone probably snitched on them and said, "Hey, this guy was talking bad about, uh, the Communist Party or whatever." So anyway, that's what's going on over there. We're gonna see what happens. I'm very interested in this, but just wanted to bring out some of the historical implications of this and why China is acting like this. And now that we know the history, the fact that they're extremely worried about social unrest, at the same time they're worried about their power. So we're going to see how they try to balance this. It could turn out very badly because, as we all know, government can never do anything right. And what they're attempting to do is a very, very delicate situation, and government never does anything delicate. So that's it. Peace out.